Hello everybody, I am BenMC25 and this is my wish list for The Last of Us 2. The biggest thing I want to see improved on in The Last of Us 2 is the human AI. I want to see them just in general a lot more tactically smart and also a lot more human. And that goes without saying, but in a couple of ways. I want them to act like they care about their own life and the lives of their friends and not do insanely stupid things that will get them killed. Like, if you're searching for somebody who is armed, do it as a group, split up, and do it stealthily and quietly. Don't do it like really loud. Don't just walk around shouting. No, quietly, just shift swiftly from room to room. And don't do all that crap where they like walk around in the open if they know Joel's somewhere around there, or whoever you play as, somewhere around there. No, they should be sticking to cover and limiting the time they spend outside of cover. The single biggest thing I want them to do with the AI is to remove instant death. If somebody gets shot in real life, the chance of them just instantly dropping down dead on the ground, game over, is very low. And I understand that this is a video game and it isn't real life, but I do feel like with The Last of Us, the Naughty Dog team really tried to make the combat feel brutal and almost make the player appalled by their actions. Now, just dying, ragdoll style, is kind of simple and it's easier. If the player kills an enemy and they just die, it's quite easy to kind of deal with that. Yet, if you shot somebody in the leg or you blew them up with a bomb, and they roll around on the ground slowly bleeding out, and yelling and screaming, or perhaps you shot him in the chest and he's gasping for air on the ground in a pile of blood, that is way tougher to deal with. And it also adds an opportunity to make the AI much more real with the way that their companions react to that. You know, if your friend is dying on a pool of blood while you're in a gunfight with some madman in a hotel, you'd be freaking out because you'd be torn between the situation of saving him if he's in the open and not getting shot yourself. And I would very much love to see the human side of the AI where they can verbally be struggling with the option of your friend's dying slowly there on the ground, but you're in a gunfight and you can't really save him, or maybe you're a crazy asshole and you like that guy so much that you're gonna jump out in the open and try to drag him away. In any case, that is the single biggest thing I actually want with their AI. I have thought about a system that they could do that, and essentially the killing bullet in The Last of Us 1, wherever that lands is kind of contextual. You shoot them in the head, they die just ragdoll style. Shoot them in the chest, and that was the killing bullet, then they can just collapse to the ground, maybe make a couple gas sounds and they're done. The killing bullet lands in the leg, they can fall over, and perhaps they'll just sit there lying and screaming in their own pile of blood. Perhaps they'll actually try to shoot you while they can't really do anything else. Or the lower gut, have them run back to cover and keep on being mobile, keep on in the fight, but slowly dying. Bleeding out. Or maybe they just completely panic about bleeding out. And then you can have his buddy trying to like patch him up or apply first aid. Very complex ideas, but humans aren't simple. And if The Last of Us 2 wants to be really powerful with the AI, they need to make them very complex and very human. And seeing them panic while dying is going to be a good way to do that. And add a nice sympathetic touch to generally situations where we're going to be justified in killing all of them. Another thing I'd love to see in The Last of Us 2 is skill levels between the AI. And that's basically to differentiate the really hardened survivors between the more rookies, or the paramilitary groups like the military or the Fireflies, and the hunters, kind of like. Whereas the hunters would be a bit of a mixed bag. You'd have guys that are not so great at fighting because they mostly just avoided it. And then you'd have the ones that are so damn good at it because they've been doing it for 20 years. They're basically badasses like Joel. And then on top of that, you could have like the military, where they're going to have more consistently well-trained guys because, you know, they're the military, whereas the hunters mixed bag, you know? They got some so-so guys in there, but then they got the good ones. And I'd love to see that. On top of that, I want to see cowardly kind of, or guys that are more willing to run away and of a fight they won't win, and then, you know, the really hardened guys that aren't going to give up and they're going to keep on coming after you. And the only reason I'd like to see the AI have that, something like that built into them as well, is so that you could specifically have some of them panic, you know, as their friends are dying or something like that, and actually run away. And once again, really the only thing that gave me that is, one, that's a human thing to do, but ultimately, two, it's actually an animation built into The Last of Us 1. The first Last of Us has that in there. If you beat them down, they will beg for their life and say, you know, cool, please don't kill me, as you got a shotgun pointed right at his face. Except, they will get back up after about 3 seconds of saying that and just basically charge at you. Be real stupid with that. If they hadn't put that in, honestly, I would have been more happy, because that is insanely annoying when games do that. Fallout did that, Skyrim did that. They just all come back to kill you, even though they're fucked. They're fucked, and they come back to kill you. They should just give up, stay there, run away, whatever. Don't just have them get back up and try to kill you. So yes, I would like a system where if you've killed like 7 guys out of 10, like the hardened guy will stick around, but the more cowardly guy will run off, and the hardened guy would swear at him for fucking off and tell him to get back in there and fight. But he'd run off, and then you'd just be left with like the hardness of grizzly survivor that ain't gonna give up because he's too prideful, or he's, I don't know, something like that. Another thing I would like Naughty Dog to experiment with be kind of like just random skills or traits that the enemy combatants can be given. What happens if there was a guy who was just randomly given first aid? You know, maybe was a medic or something, and he can heal his friends, heal his buddies, and, you know, bandage them up in battle. And this could be again with, you know, you could stop by some guy in a gunfight that you've shot or something, and he could be wrapping something around his arm. Or maybe you could even stop a bleed out, you know, with what I was talking about before, with them more like slowly dying. Maybe, you know, if the friend's basically been hit a couple times in the gut and he's essentially dying, he can run up to him, patch him up, and just hold him together. Doesn't need to give him any extra health, or maybe he can just give him a little bit more health to just to stop him from like bleeding out or anything. Or what happens if one guy is the Shiv Master skill, and basically, if perhaps in The Last of Us 2, where if you end up fighting infected Inhumans again, this guy is essentially able to shiv off a clicker, just like Joel is with that skill, Shiv Master. And so he can't be killed by clickers, or he has a number of shivs to use against him, like 2 or something. An interesting one I'd like to see, actually, very much, would be like maybe a revenge system or a BFF skill, where like 2 AI are given, specifically given skills where essentially if you kill one of the ones that carries this skill, the other one will basically just flip out because you've killed his best friend, or you've killed her, because I'd love to see some female hunters in the game. You know, you've killed her buddy, or her her sister or something like that, and she's just gonna absolutely flip out, and she's gonna become maybe recklessly aggressive and just never gonna give up and just gonna want to kill your fucking guts. Or if you grab, you know, the AI with this skill, you know, and use them as a human shield, before the gunfights happened, like this person is basically gonna, I don't know, beg you to let them go, you know, and something like that. And even if you start shooting, like, they're not gonna fire on their basically their best friend or their everything, you know, their reason for fighting and staying alive in this grisly post-apocalyptic universe, because they'll do whatever it takes to keep this person alive. And if you kill this person, they are coming after you, and they are never going to stop. Before I move on to the multiplayer, of which I have many thoughts on, I just want to mention that if they're gonna, which they're probably gonna do, because it's an effective way to build characters, have companions fighting alongside you, maybe they should consider doing them a little differently. If the companion has limitless ammo, even if the bullet damage is so weak that it looks like Bill is using a shotgun, um, well, it does leave the game open to manipulation with playing. Luckily, Bill actually has this really good machete, which is way better than his shotgun, and he he can honestly take care of almost all the infected in that entire section. In fact, I can get through Billstown with maybe one or two bullets and then just a Molotov and a bomb to take care of the bloater, and that is all the bullets I will ever need. The rest of it will be pipes, punching, 2x4s, everything like that. I do think they could experiment with some different AI options, and perhaps that could help. Um, I think it'd be interesting if they could play around with maybe the AI not having limited ammo and maybe even a bit of health. They can't die or anything, just they're not really going to fight if they're injured too badly. And yeah, so I don't know. They could pick up some ammo when you do, and when they run out, they run out. And if they're injured, they're not going to fight so much. And I suppose they'd have to be fairly defensive if they were like that, because and just like defend the player from immediate threats, because you wouldn't want them just like using their last shotgun bullet or on something in the distance that doesn't really matter immediately. Um, one last thing I'd love for them to do with the single player is to change listening mode. I think listening mode in The Last of Us is actually very anticlimactic and just like alleviates really any tension. You can kind of know where everything is in the entire game just by using that one mode. It's just very boring, and the game has a lot more suspense and tension on the modes where you can't use that or you're forced to not. Um, but I like the concept. I like the concept of using listening mode or listening as a concept, and I really think there's an opportunity there if they could somehow manage to get to program it to actually use sound for listening mode. I'm not 100% sure how they could get it to work. With it'd be a lot of complicated stuff with perhaps echoing and the way sound bounces around and moves out and be useful would even be challenging. But I just like the idea of if you want to check kind of what's in the room next to you, you just listen to mode, and instead of like just seeing an outline, perhaps you hear creaking on floorboards or breathing, or rustling of leaves or a clicker sound. Um, just to really get the player involved in the universe and to actually raise tension a lot in that situation. There was what was it? One of the last Five Nights at Freddy game actually did something kind of similar to this, where they really got the player to pay attention to breathing when they were looking at a dark, empty room. And while I didn't play the game, I watched it on YouTube like everybody else, but in doing so, they really had the player concentrating and just raised the tension. And I'm pretty sure the jump scares in that game probably would have been way worse than any of the other ones simply because of that. Um, yeah. And so now I move on to my first thing that they should add because of the multiplayer, and that is to remove this. This is really shitty on the multiplayer. If somebody shoots at you, you should definitely have just as at least a better shot at shooting back at them. The best system to fix this is to just copy Metal Gear Solid, the Phantom Pain system, and Ground Zeroes. But that system is fantastic. It does take a little bit to get used to, but I think it would just it would make it a better game. And I I think if they're clear with the when you can't shoot, that it wouldn't really slow down the multiplayer at all. It would just get rid of some of that bullshit. And removing bullshit is a good thing. The next rather bullshit thing I'd love for them to remove is enemy name tags. That's kind of bullshit, especially when that enemy worked his ass off, or at least was smart enough to try to hide behind a piece of cover that you're about to walk past, or you just basically would have missed him because you're lazy and you were not paying attention, and his name tag flashed up. Couldn't do fucking anything about it. You don't know when your name tag's popping up, and they now know where you are and they put a couple bullets into you. That just is bullshit. The characters are well defined and they have a certain look that is so good. They don't need name tags to tell if they're an enemy. They look completely different to your own guy. The next thing is to include the extra animations. In The Last of Us multiplayer, they don't include some animations, and that's, to be honest, I wouldn't care, except when they're really critical. The animations I'm talking about is the ones like picking up health kits and, grabbing boxes. That's alright. I don't care about that. Though, admittedly, there's an argument to be made that seeing some guy's arms stick up grabbing a health kit, you could see that. Yes, but anyway, in Last of Us 2's multiplayer, they do need to include that, and it's only because of the bow, really. I feel so sorry for bow users because I can always tell when they're behind cover because the fucking arrow is sticking through the wall. Unfortunately, putting your arrow up against the wall is part of those animations that don't disappear, and the characters, when other people look at you, don't do that. That, honestly, was a really bad move for Bo. Using The Last of Us 1's control scheme, I personally would have switched R1, R2 to the melee button and square to the reload. This is so you can change your camera angle while melee attacking. This would have been very useful because that is something that gets melee players killed a lot. I'd love for Naughty Dog to go that little bit extra mile and make the characters that are playing on the multiplayer maps really feel like they came out of that place. The Boston Hunters look very different to the Winter Hunters. The Winter Hunters are covered in all this snow. They've got snow they're just covered in snow. And then when you come to Last vs. Multiplayer, you got dudes in shorts wearing tank tops playing in a blizzard. It doesn't feel that extra little bit. It would just add much to me if per se they were to use the winter models on the winter maps, and that just would make heaps of sense. The other way they could do it is just have the models change slightly depending on the environments of the maps they're playing in. I believe, what was it, Assassin's Creed 3's multiplayer, which probably didn't get many ratings of being good, but it did have two variations for the characters you play as, because sometimes they were playing in blizzards, and so they'd look snow covered. On that note of extra authenticness for the characters, I want to see all the weapons visible on them in the gun department, at the very least. I did think it would have been awesome if potentially they could have gotten the hunters to visibly tuck in their sidearms into their pants, just like the single player, and then the Fireflies could have been given Joel's holster. Obviously, the El Diablo would complicate things, because where are you going to put that? But anyway, that would have been awesome. I want to see people's secondaries on their body. I would love it if the environment would really play a role in the game, even tactically, through perhaps ways it can tell you about what's happening. Like tracking would be a thing I would love to do on snow maps, for example. On Lakeside, you will see that you leave behind your own set of footprints, but you can't ever see anybody else's, so you can't really follow them. And that is one example of tracking, which would have been super awesome. I'd love that. The environment to give me information. just like how shadows help you out. Other things I'd love to see perhaps is bottles just lying around, perhaps, and if somebody just like stupidly walks into them or kicks them over, then they're gonna make a little sound. Or broken glass on the floor, creaky floorboards, dust maybe falling from the ceiling if somebody's walking up on it. Just little ways the environment can really get involved and become a character in the multiplayer. Another super cool thing I'd love them to do with the maps would be to add dynamic day and weather. I won't be the first person to mention this, but at the very least, can we get some dynamic weather? That would be super cool. Super cool. Last but not least, I think they should expand upon the metagame and make it really a game in itself. I think if they expand upon it, though, they need to give you a way to opt out of it if you don't care about it. But I'd love to see the metagame take on a sort of kind of like a management system-ish sort of thing, where you have to kind of juggle supplies and perhaps it's quite more in depth and you get choices about whether or not you want your hunter group to be cannibalistic or that just like management game basically or something like that, but nicely done. And they could actually build it into the core game where kind of depending on what mode you're playing is something to do with what you're gathering or or something like that. Like if you're going after interrogation, you're stealing supplies for your clan or something like that. I think there's a lot they could do there, whether or not and how difficult that would be to do for them, especially because I don't think they have any real experience with that sort of game building. Is would be interesting to see what you could do. I think going with that and going with the whole factions theme, it could be quite important that team casualties, whenever you play the multiplayer, are casualties on your faction, just because it makes sense. I'm not sure how this would affect balancing. In fact, they'd need to do a lot of things to get it to work like that. But essentially, if somebody died, they're meant to represent your clan. They're meant to your team, your camp, whatever you want to call them. They're meant to represent them. So if they get killed, then they should be taken as a casualty on your camp. I suppose I could do some stuff where if the character bleeds out instead of actually getting shot dead, then potentially they could I don't know, be saved or just be like incredibly critically injured just to reduce the amount of sheer casualties. But other than that, like it makes sense. They should be casualties. Um, that's really all I have on this list. I understand this is going to be very dodgy to actually watch, especially because of how pain in the ass chef actually been. But it's actually been a lot of fun. I became a bit more confident as this went on to just talk to you instead of trying to be clear and precise the first time. I just talked to you like I would anybody else. So that's been helpful. Um, yeah. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to mention. So, cheers.